Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is our good friend, Kathleen Norris. Kathleen is an award-winning poet, writer, and author of the New York Times bestsellers, The Cloister Walk, Acedia and Me, A Marriage Monk and a Writer's Life, also Dakota, A Spiritual Geography, also Amazing Grace, A Vocabulary of Faith, and finally, The Virgin of Bennington. Widowed in 2003, Kathleen now spends time in Honolulu, where she volunteers in an Episcopal church. She travels to the mainland regularly to speak to students, medical professionals, social workers, and chaplains at colleges and universities, as well as at seminaries, churches, and teaching hospitals. For many years, she was the poetry editor of Spirituality and Health magazine and is currently an editorial advisor to Give Us This Day. So welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you. I'm very glad you're doing this for everyone's sake.
Well, it's certainly a wonderful, treat to have you involved in it. So thank you so much for, spending some time to do this. Maybe we can start off. You can just give us your thoughts on kind of where we are today as a society with this crisis.
Well, it's obviously very trying times. I do think it's faintly hilarious that it's happening during Lent for Christians. That you want Lent, folks, we've got it. And I live in Honolulu. We just got the lockdown order to basically stay in your home, work from home, very limited travels to doctors or the grocery stores and all of that, which I've basically been doing for the last 2 weeks anyway, because I have two risk factors for this, and I just didn't think it was right to go out and on the city bus or even going to a grocery store if I could avoid it. So I think, everybody's got, it's a horrendous problem for parents whose kids are home from school, people who can't work from home and I'm sure are terrified to be going out. And I guess for myself, being isolated and living alone as I do, I think one of the things that's happened is that I'm praying more. I'm praying for all those people who are in much worse situations than I'm in, because I think that's something I can do. And I live in an apartment building, but Hawaii is a very friendly place. And we have, in this building, we have a lovely resident manager, and I'm on the board, and so he's basically asked the board members to call or check on the elderly in our building. We have people in their 80s and 90s, and so we've been making sure they have a way to get groceries if they don't have local family. We've been calling. I have been calling and not dropping in because of the virus, but just calling people and letting them know. And similarly at my church, the prayer chain, I'm on the prayer chain, and we've been doing that with the elderly too, because a number of people are in lockdown in their nursing homes and even senior living places that normally are fairly open. They're pretty much in lockdown. So we've been, if they have email, we've been emailing, we've been sending cards, calling, just to let them know that even though we're not getting together for church, they're not forgotten. I think all those kinds of things are really important. And then finding anything online that can help you. I've been the St. John's Abbey in Minnesota, where I've spent a lot of time there, and I know all the monks. They've been live streaming their daily mass now. And that has become a mainstay for me because, the music and the homilies are very good, and hearing the scripture readings out loud, all of that is wonderful. And then I got to thinking, it's nice to be with the Benedictines because they lived through the plague in the 14th century and they survived. They lived through the 1918 flu epidemic. They've been around for over 1,500 years, and somehow just knowing that there's a group of people who have that kind of continuity, with human experience is a help in itself. I think it's a powerful thing. And it's rare these days. We don't have a lot of our things don't seem to have much continuity in our society.
Well, I really think it's wonderful that you're extending your own personal ministry to help, so many folks there. And, the fact that you're more technologically, enabled, equipped, advanced than a lot of folks, who are older, is a really helpful right now for them and for you.
Well, I'm older too. I'm almost 73, but I only learned to stream, I think, about a year ago, so I can stream movies and things like that. And it's funny, I had to join the prayer chain at my church because I was resistant to get email. And finally the group said, we have one member in her 90s who doesn't have email, and you're the only other member who doesn't have it, and so you have to get it. They forced me to do it, and they taught me how to add an attachment, all those things, which right now during this crisis, it's really helping, because I can a friend is sending me these beautiful photographs of the orchids in her garden on the windward side of Oahu, and I've been forwarding them to people and forwarding the pictures. Those kinds of things. I think anything we can do to stay connected right now is really important.
I couldn't agree more.
And I have a niece in New Jersey, one of my mainstays, the Mass at St. John's, and then the other daily mainstay is my niece in New Jersey has been sending little videos every day of her two daughters. They're ages 4 and 6, and they're telling jokes to each other. And they're the kind of really stupid jokes that little kids think are hilarious. So the jokes are awful, but the joy is watching these two little girls just collapse in laughter and giggle and poke each other, and it's just so wonderful. So that's been a mainstay for me. Anything that gives you joy, like that kind of joy. And Westfield, the town of Westfield did a wonderful thing. Other towns might consider this. They said chalk the walk, and they meant kids should go out, and adults too for that matter, could go out to their sidewalks and decorate them with chalk. So my two grandnieces went out and did rainbows, and the older one did a very long line, practically the whole length of her block. And she's standing I got a picture of her standing very proudly beside this accomplishment, But simple things like that I think right now make a big difference.
Yes, well, that's wonderful that they're sending you those videos. I think that is really an excellent idea. And the sidewalk chalk is popular here too. When we walked around our neighborhood the other day, you could tell the houses that have got younger children.
Well, I think if I were there, I don't have any chalk. I'm trying to think if I have any chalk in my apartment. I'd go out and decorate my neighborhood. I think adults could be able to do that too. But the jokes are so ridiculous. I think the last one was, how do eggs stay in shape? By exercising. It's really dumb stuff like that. But to watch them just crack up, and of course for little kids, learning how to tell jokes is a skill. It takes a while to learn how to make a joke and what a joke means, and everything. And so anyway, that's been a lot of fun. And just sharing jokes online too with people. Anything that helps right now, I think, is a big, is important. And I think it is ironic in a way that all of our detached visual aids, social media, is actually finally bringing us closer together.
Absolutely. I think, it's as we were discussing before we started recording, I think that, this event, this crisis is really going to accelerate the use of online facilities for all kinds of different reasons.
Yeah. And I'm not too happy about that in a way, but I think right now it's wonderful. So, for certain things, but.
Well, if you send me a couple of pictures from Oahu, the waves or the things that you were mentioning, I'll put it up on the Writing for Your Life website so more people can see it.
I've got some gorgeous pictures of orchids. I've got a friend who has a wonderful backyard full of orchids.
Excellent. Yeah, please send those along, and I'll share them with people.
Yeah, because anything with beauty right now, natural beauty. My sister, my youngest sister lives in Oregon now, and she posted a photo of just a little pond and a waterfall where she and her husband went and had a picnic in the outdoors, and they said this is social isolation in Oregon, and stuff like that. It's wonderful to see that, and wonderful to see people doing that.
So you've written extensively about dealing with pain and dealing with suffering. And, I think that people have a lot that they can learn from you. So before we start talking about your book specifically, maybe you can share just kind of some of your learnings and some of the ways that you can pass along to folks.
Well, I think, for a lot of people right now, we're experiencing unimaginable loss. I know some college and high school seniors who are just bereft. They're not going to go to prom. They're not going to have their graduation ceremonies. And it's awful for a young person to have to go through that. There's all kinds of unimaginable loss, and including, I think I just read this morning about a 39-year-old woman who died from this virus. It's unimaginable. It's someone that young. It annoys me when people that much younger than me actually die. I get angry. So right now we're facing unimaginable loss, the loss of income for a number of people. Flight attendants are only paid for the hours they're actually in the air. So a lot of flight attendants are completely without any income unless they have a second job. There's all kinds of loss right now. And I guess with myself, my life, starting a long time ago when my husband first became ill, but since 2002, I've lost my father, my husband, one sister, and my mother. And that is an unimaginable loss to me. If someone had told me that during those years this all would be happening, I would have panicked. But as it unfolded, in my life, I could cope with it. I found that I could be a caregiver to my husband and to my parents and my sister. I could do all kinds of things I hadn't imagined myself doing. And I think that's one of the things with loss, that you find strengths that you didn't know you had, because you really are more, you have to be more concerned with that other person than with yourself. Although I learned as a caregiver, you also have to take care of yourself. And I joined a water aerobics class years ago because just to help me deal with the stress. So I think, and then writing books was another way I was dealing with all of that loss. And I think especially with acedia and some of that loss is in there, and writing about grief and loss.
Well, also too, I know in the Cloister Walk, you talk about how the music and the liturgy meant so much to you.
It did, and it does. The Cloister Walk was such a fun book to write. It was basically incorporating years of knowing Benedictine men and women and being able to write about them and their life, and how it really did calm me down in many ways over a period of years, where things that used to unhinge me really didn't anymore, because that pace of the liturgy, the steady daily prayer, and their long-term perspective on things had a real impact on me. And I remember, I'll never forget, one of the letters I got about the Cloister Walk was from a man whose wife was dying of ovarian cancer. And that struck a note, because I had a very dear friend, a mentor, who died of ovarian cancer way back in 1987. And his letter was all about how, they had tried, he was reading books to her in the hospital. I think she was in hospice by then. And that the Cloister Walk was the book they kept returning to. It was one of the few that they could read while she was in this condition. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is incredible, because I certainly didn't write the book with them in mind. I didn't write the book intending for any of that to happen. But there it was, that they were able to use what I'd written about the Benedictine world and their life of prayer and their perspective on things, and somehow in that dire situation they were in, it was helping them. And I'll never forget that. That really stayed with me. Very moving letter.
That's really great to hear. And I know you said that you'd recently gotten a note about acedia in that same regard.
This morning, a friend of mine was talking about how I think I have mental mental inertia or something, and I read it and I kind of laughed, and then I was going down, and a friend of his, someone I don't even know, had posted a cover of my book Acedia and said this book might help. And then I commented on it, and I said, acedia, I think, is a lot like this virus. It's opportunistic. Acedia will seize a moment like this when people are unexpectedly without all the resources that they're used to having, like going out in the world, socializing, going to office, going to school. Acedia can take great advantage of this because it is that feeling of a mixture of boredom and despair that I think all of us are feeling right now. And because I'm so aware of acedia, I've been actively resisting it myself and doing a number of things to help keep it at bay. But it's there, I think. And I'm kind of glad I wrote the book, but I was so startled to see my book cover just on Facebook.
Well, I'll make sure that I make a post about that, because I think that, you know, people that are not aware of that book may really find it pretty useful right now.
And the reason I wrote it is because I discovered in a piece of writing written 1700 years ago, a 4th century monk basically describing something that I had experienced all my life but never knew what to call it. And I think that's one of the reasons that people read and that writers write, is because a writer can define something for you that you know about, but you never knew exactly what it was or how to define it. And here was Evagrius, this 4th century monk, describing a feeling I'd had over many, many years. And so I thought, well, I'm going to look into this. And I looked, you know, I found out the word acedia was used quite a bit in the Middle Ages, of course, during the time of plague in the 14th century. And then it kind of dropped out. It became listed as obsolete in the Oxford English Dictionary. And after World War II, it was back. And I said, okay, I need to write a book. I need to write about this word, which keeps coming and going from our vocabulary. And until recently, I think the only people who were aware of that word were people who knew monastic history or in monastic studies, and maybe some theologians. But I do think it is a word that can help us right now, because, you know, restlessness and boredom and sorrow and sadness all combined in one nasty little feeling. I think that's what a lot of us are going through right now, because so much has been suddenly taken from us. Even monks are talking about, you know, that they're going beyond their comfort zones now in how they're living. And so I think it is an important word, and I should spell it because it's acedia for people if you want to look it up. It's a fascinating word, and it's never really been translated from the Greek. There's no one English word that will substitute for it.
Well, thank goodness for books, right? I mean, and I think, you know, as you said, we have to learn from our past many times over. And hopefully this time of folks being more at home will allow for more books to be read.
I'm hoping. I'm reading some. I have some hardbacks, you know, some books on hand, and I'm thinking this might be for me to reach out of my comfort zone, because I have a Kindle, but I really don't read books on it, and this may be the time to finally start doing that. I just don't enjoy, much rather have a book in my hand, and so this may be the time for me to kind of, okay, I have a Kindle, maybe I should start to use it to read books on it. So we'll see if I can do that or not. But yeah, but praying, reading, streaming good movies, and even silly movies. The next book I still get some DVDs from Netflix. I'm going to rewatch Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Mr. Rogers. That's a lovely film, and I need to see it again.
I think silly movies are a good thing right now.
Yeah.
So I know when this whole virus, you know, first started, you know, taking over here, I got kind of curious about, you know, some of the previous large-scale diseases. You know, you mentioned a couple, the plague, of course, and the what was called the Spanish flu in 1918. Mm-hmm. You know, I started reading a little bit, at least, you know, Wikipedia level about, you know, those kinds of things. What can you tell us about, you know, your readings about the monks and what happened with the plague back, you know, centuries ago?
Of course, they lost a lot of I'm sure I don't really know that much about that history. I just know that basically monasteries survived. I'm sure they lost a lot of people because a huge number of the population died, but their very isolation might have helped. And in fact, that's what they're doing now. Most Benedictine monasteries, Benedict says a monastery is never without guests. And one of the hard things that they're having to do now is to isolate themselves. So the guest house at St. John's is closed for the first time in its history because they just need to, and when you see them in their choir stalls, they're not sitting next to each other. They're keeping some distance. They're trying to follow this, but isolating themselves. And I think in the Middle Ages, probably the fact that they weren't out there in the towns, they weren't probably as exposed to the plague as a lot of people were, might have helped them survive. And about 1918, I know my parents were infants, and they survived 1917, 18, 19. And years later, I got a bad case of the flu. They called it the Asian flu. I think it was 1968 when a really bad strain came to America. And I was in Hawaii. Unfortunately, I was home with my parents, and they took care of me. And I had a fever of over 104, and my mom said if my fever hadn't broken, she was going to take me to the hospital, but she basically nursed me through it. And I met an epidemiologist once, and I asked him, I said, how come my parents never got sick? I said, they were with me every day. They were taking care of me. And he said, it's because they'd built up immunity from that 1917, 18, and every flu bug since then. And that's why younger people tend to get the flu more than older people who have built up immunity. Of course, once people are very old and frail, that protection sort of goes away. But I was fascinated by that, and I think that's one of the differences we're seeing with this virus, that young people in America, at least a lot of young people are dying, people in their 30s and 40s. But no one has immunity to this because it is apparently a new virus.
So, Kathleen, one of the things that I think you're a little bit known for is kind of, spiritual practices. So what advice along those lines do you have for folks today?
Well, I think spiritual and very practical practices. It is practice. I think in some ways my living alone as a widow for a number of years has actually helped me deal with this new crisis a little better than a lot of people. My self-isolating is more extreme. I'm used to getting on the bus, going to the gym, going to stores, and I've pretty much stopped doing that. And I'm also a freelance writer, and one of the things you learn as a freelancer is that you could work all the time or you could work none of the time. You can go from one extreme to the other. And I think it's important to maintain some kind of schedule. So I have but the morning ritual is the paper, my Give Us This Day prayer book, praying for the people on the prayer chain list, a cup of coffee, doing some kind of reading the newspaper, checking email. But I try to make sure that I take a shower and wash my hair every day. I make sure that I'm, like yesterday, I cooked some lentils and I cooked some rice up, so I'll have a supply this week. Just doing some basic things to keep going, not to just sit around and stew and get into despair. And I've seen some very funny jokes about, I was going to start my novel this week because I have all this time, and instead I just put ice cream on my pasta and watched a soap opera. I mean, we can do either extreme. But I think sometimes, and I think this is part of the Benedictine values too, is keeping some balance. So you want to share your silly jokes, maybe watch a silly movie, but you also want to keep the daily spiritual practices that help, that whatever works for you, whatever keeps you going. Sometimes it's meditating on icons. It could be praying. For me, it's usually reading or meditating on scripture. Whatever helps right now, I think is really important.
Maybe we need to start like a silly joke of the day or something like that we can start sending around.
Someone sent me one, how to make a quarantini.
Yes, I saw that. I posted it too.
But but then you drink it at home alone. I mean, and of course, what's one of the things I love about American culture is that we will joke about everything. And so you see some pretty good jokes emerging. The one I saw today that made me laugh was if Kevin Bacon tests positive for coronavirus, then we're all really screwed.
That's great.
Crazy Kevin Bacon. So, I mean, people are just coming up with things that help. I really do think silliness helps. A realtor friend of mine sent me one. She said, this is dumb, but I'm going to share it anyway. And she said, a realtor showing a home to a prospective buyer. And she said, now just imagine yourself quarantined in this beautiful house. Just silly, you know.
What a better place to be quarantined in, right, than a beautiful house.
A selling point. This would be a good place to be quarantined. But it is really upsetting and disturbing. There's so much going on with the economy, so much uncertainty right now. You don't want to make light of it either, but I think even if it's gallows humor sometimes, I think joking really helps. And I'm just thinking of a joke. I have some Russian in-laws now, and anybody who's good at gallows humor, it's Russians. And this was a joke from the Stalinist era, and everyone is standing in line to buy basics, buy bread, I guess. An old man, when they get up to standing for hours, and he finally gets up, and there's no bread left. And so he starts, even though he knows it's dangerous under Stalin to complain out loud, to say anything that would reflect badly on the government. He just can't contain his frustration, and he starts complaining about the shortages of all the daily necessities. And finally, a soldier comes up to him, just makes a gesture of shooting him. And he said, "Oh my God, it's worse than I thought. They're out of bullets too." That kind of humor, even that kind of humor can help.
Right. So, Kathleen, we would love if you could read us a couple of poems from that book.
Yeah, this is my new and selected poems. University of Pittsburgh, and it's still in print. Thank God for university presses that keep books in print a long time. This is a poem called What Song Then? And it's based on Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept. And that's how that psalm begins. And it's basically a song of lament of the people who were in exile in Babylon. The Israelites were in exile. And I think it points to the importance of remembering, because I think sometimes we're in bad times, we can remember that times weren't always as bad, and maybe that gives us hope for the future. So here it is. What song then? When my life is alien soil and a wind like fear makes restless ground of all I've done, what song then to send out roots to drink the rain that does not come? How could I sing? Watch light come from dark and mist rise from waters, sky and shore emerge out of night, and a tree, half green, half bare. Half afraid of what is in me, though God has called it good, I sob over nothing, desires I cannot name. Sing us, they say, a song you remember.
That's beautiful.
Well, thank you. And of course, that psalm talks about the bitterness there of these people who have enslaved us want us to sing our old songs. How can we sing our song or the song of the Lord on alien soil? And again, that poem came straight out of experiencing that psalm in Benedictine liturgy, praying it with monastic people. And I've got one more, and it's basically a lot of things in this poem are just things that people said. It was about serving coffee and cookies and stuff at the nursing home, which is one of the things that people can't do right now. But in my little town, the different churches would take turns doing that, going to the nursing home once a month or whatever. And this was just came out of actual conversations about that experience. Because I think we have a choice. We can either let things really depress us or we can find hope somewhere. And that's kind of what this is about. The Presbyterian women serve coffee at the home. I'm so afraid, one says, of growing old. Not of growing old, says another, but catastrophic illness. Becoming helpless, adds one, losing the little mind I've got. We laugh and throw out coffee grounds. And yet, says one, I see my grandmother now and remember her as she was. It's hard for me, but I wonder how unhappy she really is. They live in the past, says one. It's a kind of mercy, says another. Their husbands haven't died, their children are still young. They make no distinction between the living and the dead. It must be like eternal life, says one who wipes the coffee pot and folds the dish towels. Fear passes out of us. We scoop up cookie crumbs and scour out the sink. Then we each go our own way, unaccountably happy.
Oh, that's great. Wonderful, wonderful.
A line that did not make it into that poem was something I said to the women. I said, you know, I got to thinking today, there's a sing-along, we do a hymn sing, there's all kinds of things. We say the Lord's Prayer. And of course, even people in nursing homes will remember the Lord's Prayer. They'll tap their feet to the music, even if they'll recognize the songs. And I said, I just got to thinking that these people are truly blessed. They'll never have to fill out an IRS form again. I couldn't find a way to put that in the poem.
Well, thanks for that extra side note that we now have.
Footnotes.
Well, Kathleen, this has really been quite a treat to be able to talk with you and to have you share your experiences, your wisdom, your thoughts with our audience. And I know that they're going to really enjoy this, get a lot from it.
Well, good. Thanks. And I'm grateful that you're doing this, because I think anything that lifts people's spirits even a little bit right now is important to do.
Yes, I am in total agreement. And I think that this has been one of those experiences that people really enjoy. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you.